Okay. Well, story time's over. Let's talk about the facts again. The murder of Matthew Restelli was a needless tragedy. It was an unreasonable tragedy. There is overwhelming evidence that Matthew was lured to his death, and that the crime scene was staged with a knife planted in his hand. Even the defense admits this much. And during this trial, the defense has attempted to portray Kevin Ellis as a hero. That's the word they used during trial. And during their argument today, they said protector. They wanted to believe Kevin was a white knight rushing in to save the day. But the truth is, Kevin was a cold-blooded murderer, lying in wait to kill his brother-in-law. And this dichotomy is what this case is about. The law does not require you to resolve every mystery connected to this case, or every question connected to this case. All the law requires you to do is answer whether Mr. Ellis is guilty of murder and conspiracy. Everything else is just noise. And that's what you heard during that argument. Noise. We need to separate the noise from the constitutional principles we all believe in. We need to separate the noise from the law that the judge has instructed you on. Separate the noise and focus on the evidence. Not what the defense counsel thinks, not what they're interested in finding out, not the information on the slides that was never introduced into evidence. Simply the evidence. So let's cut through that noise. Let's look at what the evidence tells us what happened. Now first, Kate told you what happened. She plainly testified that she and Tracy and Kevin conspired together to murder Matthew. We talked a lot about Kate and her incentives. You'll judge it. But note one thing that was very clear. When Kate truly believed something, she pushed back. She pushed back against Mr. Brown. She pushed back against Mr. Williams on 2 points. That she believed that what Matthew did to her was abuse. I think we could all agree at this point, she was not raped by Matthew. Asking your wife for sex, even when she doesn't want to, is not the same as forcing her to have sex. And she admitted as much, but she still saw it as abuse. She pushed back on that. And what else did she push back on? Had that conversation with Tracy and Kevin after sushi. She did not back down from that. That conversation happened. The defense argues that if there was a crime, Kevin was a pawn, played by 2 manipulative women. But as I told you in the opening, you should judge Kate's testimony, and everything else you hear, by what can be corroborated. What the independence confirms about what you heard. Corroboration is the quiet truth. So let's listen to what it has to tell us. The evidence. 2 very different ideas. Kevin was a pawn, he was a dupe, or he was a participant. We don't have evidence. We don't have evidence that he was a pawn. We have speculation, we have innuendo, but not evidence. We have evidence he was a participant. Where's the tracking? He was tracking weeks before the murder. He was tracking the day of the murder. He got that text. Forum, find mine. There was preparation. He babysat Kate's kids to make her lies more believable. Had to create that ruse that she went to the car rental company. No, everyone knew she had zero intent going back home with Matthew. The home was prepared. Toys were put away. Screen door was taken down. There was a blanket put on the couch. 2 youngest children were kept away. That cardboard was put out front. Gate code was sent to Matt. The lights were turned out, curtains were open. And look, Kevin was home for all of this. And you might reasonably believe one or two of these things Kevin didn't see or notice. All of them? No. Kevin knew preparations were being made. That's like what Kevin put on a gun and a holster. He knew. And he waited in the front room for Matthew to arrive. He was part of the preparation. And there's the communications. Text messages with Kate. He'd rush back if Olaf came. He'd rush back to be there when Matt was there. There was deleted text messages by Tracy, to be clear. Why would she do that? Why the messages with Kevin? Because she knew there was incriminating evidence there. And you can draw that inference too. There was the lunch, then that post-lunch discussion with Kate and Tracy. Or what's over, think about the situation. Kate and her kids, and Tracy and a couple of her kids, and Kevin are all living in the same home. They didn't need to put into text messages, into phone calls, what they needed to put to Tara Lynn living out of state, or Rachel living far north of here. They just talked about it. You can draw that conclusion that by living together, they could just talk down the hallway to each other. They communicated in advance of this murder. There was the cover-up. There was the planting of the knife that everyone agrees happened. There was the statement to be careful. Careful, because Matt might still be kicking. There's the statement that he told the police that that guy had a knife. That he was afraid for his life, so he shot. Not afraid for Kate, that's not what he said. Not afraid for Tracy or the home, that's not what he said. He was afraid for his life, so he shot. And shoot he did. 7 times, 3 times in the back. No evidence of any struggle. No evidence of arguments. No evidence that Matt had a weapon. There is no evidence of anything else other than that Kevin was shot moments after Matt entered the home, took off the sandals, and closed the door. And that holds, regardless of whether you believe it was 1 second or 1 minute. These varying timelines don't actually matter under this evidence. All the evidence together disproves of this self-defense. In fact, the timeline proposed by the defense is worse for Mr. Ellis than what the state has said. Under the state's theory, he could have at least claimed, or the argument could have been made, I should say, that he was surprised. But if it was a minute and a half, where Matt walks around, takes his shoes off, he knows who it is. He's not surprised. He doesn't need to shoot, because again, no evidence of agitation, no actual evidence of struggle, no actual evidence of an argument, no evidence Matt had a knife. Even under the expanded timeline, he should have never shot Matthew. Altogether, the direct evidence, the circumstantial evidence, and the inferences you can draw show that Kevin was not a pawn. He was a knowing, voluntary, full-throated participant in this conspiracy. Now, in contrast, this direct and circumstantial evidence was that noise I spoke about, the speculation, the innuendo, the incorrect interpretations of the facts. Trials are about whether a defendant committed a crime, not whether the investigation was perfect, and it's not about whether someone else was involved. You are not here to pass judgment on Kate, on Tracy, on Rachel, on Tara Lynn, Detective Nordine, Patrick Serpoli, or any other aspect of the investigation. Only Kevin, and whether the evidence adduced proves him guilty or not. Was the police investigation perfect? No, it was not. And of course not. Common sense tells you there's always one more thing that you could do. Always one more thing 18 months down the road that in retrospect, yeah, maybe I could have done that. The important part is whether the investigation that was done produced sufficient evidence. And here it produced volumes of evidence against Mr. Ellis and his co-conspirators. Enough evidence to prove Kevin guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. There's a saying, if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, then every day would be Christmas. And that's the defense argument. There's lots of ifs and there's lots of buts. But that's not the world we live in. It's not Christmas every day for them. I don't want you to ignore something you might find important. But I want you to keep in mind the actual standard. And that is, given the evidence you have, are you firmly convinced? And in the end, there is no evidence that Kevin had any basis to believe he or anyone else was in imminent harm that night. The standard in the law the judge gave you. And there is no evidence that Kevin acted reasonably under the circumstances. Again, the word in the law the judge gave you. The evidence we have disproves self-defense. It disproves the idea, the speculation that Kevin acted reasonably. There is absolutely nothing in the laws of the state of Utah that allows you to hit a line of cocaine, put on a holster, grab a gun, let your sister lure someone into a home, lie in wait in a darkened room, and then shoot your brother-in-law moments after he walks in the door. That is murder. That is not self-defense. There is nothing in the evidence that provides any basis to support either perfect self-defense or imperfect self-defense. And you do not need to willfully blind yourself to the evidence or legitimate inferences because of those ifs and because of those buts. When you apply the common sense to the evidence, your answer should be clear. Kevin was an integral part of the conspiracy. He was the trigger man. He was the one who completed the conspiracy. Kevin murdered Matthew, and the evidence disproves speculative self-defense claims. Now, before I end, just want to point out two more things. One is about the jury instructions. Instruction 47 talks about the imminency and reasonable requirements for perfect self-defense. And instruction 55 talks about the reasonableness requirements for imperfect self-defense. And Kevin Ellis did not have any imminent danger that he was facing. You're supposed to consider factors like the nature of the danger, the immediacy, the probability that there was unlawful force coming at him, whether Matthew was violent, patterns of violence, and other relevant factors. We've gone over the evidence numerous times. I don't need to tell you this, but the evidence shows there was no imminency that Kevin was responding to. He was not under a reasonable belief that he needed to shoot Matthew. There's nothing in the evidence to indicate any form of reasonableness. The second point I wanted to make to you was about reasonable doubt. Again, I've called this noise from the defense argument speculative, because it's not based in the evidence. It's based in maybes. During this whole trial, you didn't hear a single witness testify that anyone told Kevin Matt was dangerous, or that he had a knife, or that he was coming to rape Kate or commit any other crime or imminent harm. You haven't seen a single text message, or heard a single call, or seen any other evidence to support the story that Kevin thought Matt was dangerous. Doubts must arise from the evidence, not imagination. And despite the arguments, the noise, the proposed doubts, those are not reasonable. Evidence is that Kevin was not afraid of Matt. He ridiculed Matt. He called him Olaf. He used a poop emoji to track him. He tracked Matt. He did. He knew Matt was coming. He was warned by his sister that Matt was just minutes down the freeway. Got that gun and holster. Not because he was scared. Not because he was a hero. Because that was the plan. He did what Kate and Tracy and he planned to do that day. He shot Matt when he came in the home. The defense argument amounts to this. The state must disprove every theory, every possible doubt, every interpretation. But that is not the standard. Reasonable doubt has to be reasonable. And their speculation today is not reasonable. If you are firmly convinced that Kevin committed murder, if you are firmly convinced we disprove self-defense, if you are firmly convinced he was part of the conspiracy, that's enough. Kevin killed Matthew in cold-blooded, callous murder. The fact is he had choices all throughout the days and hours leading up to that murder. He didn't have to shoot Matt. Remember, there was a peaceful option. The plan that involved him. The plan that was called off. If there was truly any perceived danger for Matt, he could have called the police. Instead, Kevin was the danger. The danger to Matt. He didn't have to shoot Matt, but he chose to. And for that choice, you should convict him of his crimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crowell. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's a couple of housekeeping